Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to continue with our class, but before I do, I want to tell you all that when I first began to learn about all of this, I was actually in Missouri at our campus there when we started Higher Ground, and I got to be good friends with a local rancher. Had a big ranch, was a pretty wealthy guy. I was with him one day when a DEA officer, Drug Enforcement Agency officer, stopped by. He had about 27,000 acres of land that he farmed. And this this DEA agent said, I'm here, I have to inspect your ranch in case there's any illegally grown drugs here. And of course, my buddy wouldn't grow anything illegal. And he said, well, he says, I don't know if that's necessary. He says, I'm a DEA agent, and I'm telling you that's why I'm here. He says, well, okay, but you better not go into that acreage over there. And with that, the DEA officer just exploded. And he says, hey, listen to me, mister. I've got the authority of the federal government with me. He reached into his back pocket and he pulled out this DEA badge. And he said, see that badge? That means I go any place I want to, anytime I want to, and nobody asks me any questions. You got that? Make myself clear? So my buddy said, well, okay, sorry, no problem. And have at it. So a little while later, I'm standing there still talking to my buddy, and all of a sudden we could hear this loud scream from this DEA agent. And we look up, and he is running as fast as he can. And when you look past him, my buddy had this enormous bull. And that bull is chasing him, and that DEA agent is running faster and faster and faster, and he's screaming for help. And so my buddy, the rancher, drops his shovel and runs over to the gate, stands up on the edge of the gate, and screams at him. He says, your badge, show him your badge. Anyway, last week we looked at the Declaration of Independence, and let's look at the Bill of Rights tonight. Okay, I want to get into that. There's a quote, I can't actually remember which of our founders said it, and I should get it because it's a quote I use frequently. And basically what he said was this. He said the Constitution without the Bill of Rights, and his words are something like it's no better than a pact with the devil. Even God wouldn't want so much power. It's basically my loose recollection of that quote. And the Bill of Rights is very, very important to us, and without it, we don't have much of what you think we would what we do have today. In fact, without it, when it was proposed, people at the time, some of the writers said, "Well, we'll pass the Constitution now. We'll get to the Bill of Rights later." And they were like, "No, we don't trust you. Nope, we want it now from the very beginning." It was kind of like, I imagine that the political theater would have been something akin to what we saw with the recent Speaker of the House election, when some of the Republicans were just holding out. No, I don't trust you to do it later. You've been here for all these years and you've never done these things, and we want investigations, and we want this, and we want commitments to committees, et cetera, and they got it. And some people talked about our government being broken, and I said, my goodness, that is the perfect example of how great a government we have. It's working exactly as it should. People are standing for what they believe in, stonewalling the process, not rubber stamping, business as usual, let's get it done. And I imagine that it was the same kind of a thing at this point when they actually did the Bill of Rights. And some people stood very strong to make sure that it was there, and it's there for us today. And the Bill of Rights is so important. So I want to look at it, and we're going to understand that what each of the amendments, what each of the articles are. We're not going to look at them all tonight. We'll get probably through a third of it or half of it, because I want you to really understand them. But one of the things to understand is that placement of each of the articles in the Bill of Rights matters. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution, that's what the Bill of Rights is, the first 10 amendments. And they matter. Not only do they matter, but where they are matters. So the first one, I want to take a minute and read it. It says this: Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Very important things, each and every one of them. We're going to look at them tonight and understand what they are, and why they are put where they are. So, in what you just heard, did anyone hear government, keep your hands off of the church? Congress shall make no law. Period. Government, you have no authority over the church. Opening line in the Bill of Rights, the first thing is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Very important. Why is that the first thing? Because our founding fathers understood where our rights came from. They understood that at no point in our history must anyone in Congress think that you are above God and above our natural rights. Because I told you last week, the whole reason that the Constitution works for us is because it does not give us any rights. What it does is it protects our God-given rights. And so the very first thing that our founding fathers said was, you have no authority over the church whatsoever at any point ever. Don't forget it. That's the very first words out of their mouths. And then they said, you can't even prohibit anyone from freely expressing and worshiping as they wish. Period. Okay? But today, churches are regulated in a lot of different ways. Why is that? How did that happen? It's important to understand so we can kind of see where things went wrong. Most churches today are what are called 501c3 churches. 501-C3. 501c3. Or maybe it's 501c-3. I think that's what it is. No churches prior to the 1950s were regulated. Almost none. There were a few, but most of them weren't. But then in the 1950s, a man who was no friend to the church, Lyndon Baines Johnson, decided to help churches become incorporated. Now, churches didn't need to be incorporated because churches were above the law. They were above the government. Remember, I showed you that last week. God, men, government, then men agree to submit themselves, God, men, and then government, and then men agree to submit themselves underneath the government, period. And so nowhere is the church under the government regulation whatsoever. But Lyndon Johnson decided that we could entice the churches, tell them that we would make them tax exempt. But prior to churches being tax exempt, what were they? They were tax immune. What's the difference between an exemption and an immunity? An exemption is a thing I give you, a privilege that I give you to keep you away from a regulation that I have. An immunity is, I have no obligation to your regulation to begin with. So churches were always tax immune. And you go back to before the 1950s, no churches were corporations. They were simply churches, period. So let's look at this a little bit because understanding this and how things go awry will help you. So once churches started becoming corporations, they step up to the buffet, the state corporate buffet. What is a corporation? A corporation is a legal entity in the eyes of the law, something created by the state. We give it all kinds of rights and responsibilities. And so they step up to the buffet, if you will, and they say, okay, hey, we'll take a helping of that, no tax. We like that one. And then they move down a little bit, and they're reaching out and they're putting something else on the plate. It's called, you can't speak against this government. And then they put something else on the plate and they say, you can't talk about politics in church. And then they put more things on it. And all of a sudden, churches fell silent. Keep in mind that the only reason we have a free nation today is because of the churches in New England and the Black Regiment at the time of the Revolution. I don't think I've talked about them yet. I will talk about them more at length. But the pastors in the churches in New England would preach these fiery sermons about whom the Son sets free is free indeed, and we have an obligation to live as free men, and the king can't control us, and we're not going to be his subjects, and all that stuff. And when they were done with their fiery sermons, they would take off their black robes, and underneath them they would have their muskets, and they say, who will come with me and join me? Let's go beat them back. Let's go force them away. And the American Revolution was fired from the pulpits in New England. Jonathan Mayhew and a whole bunch of other pastors who preached these fiery sermons and then went out and defended the nation, created the nation. And so And so today, these churches were tax immune, but they bought into this whole, you should be a corporation. It protects this, it protects that. Well, the reality is that Congress shall pass no law. What part of no law don't you understand? You cannot create any law against a church. However, if as a church, I decide to step out from under my church covering and submit myself over here to a little thing called a corporation created by the state, over here under my church covering, in my church identity, the state has no control over me. It's clear in the Constitution. Excuse me. But over here, if I become a corporation, can they control a corporation they create? Absolutely they can. Absolutely. And church after church after church got sucked into it. So all of a sudden I'm a young guy and I feel the call of God to come and start a church. And I feel it from the Almighty touching me in the heart. And what's the first thing I do today? I call a lawyer. I need to start a church. What do I have to do? He says, well, come on over here. We're going to papers for you. We're going to make you a corporation. Well, I'm not operating a business. I just want to be a church. Well, that's okay. It'll be a non-profit corporation. We'll call it a church. Now, this is important. What does the government say about taxing its corporations? You're all taxable. We don't give anybody any breaks. But I'm a church. We do charitable things. We help people. We feed people. We pray for people. Well, you can apply, and we'll see if we'll allow it. We'll see if we'll grant it to you. So long as you do what we say, as long as you do it our way, we'll allow it. As soon as you talk politics, though, we're going to say you're not a church. We'll take away your tax-exempt status. That's what they do. So they effectively silence the churches. Lyndon Johnson knew exactly what he was doing. So let's understand a little bit more about this, because as you put it all together, it'll make a lot of sense. So how many of you know that the Christians in Rome were thrown to the lions, fed to the lions, because they were Christians, right? That's not why. Nope. Trick question again. They were fed to the lions, but not because they were Christians. The Romans didn't care if you were a Christian or not. They didn't care whatsoever. They didn't care if you were a Christian, if you worshiped Semiramis, the sun god, or if you worshiped the moon god, or if you were one of those Eastern religions. They had hundreds of churches in Rome. But there was one thing you had to do if you were a church in Rome. You had to, once a year, go to Roman City Hall and admit that you were licit to Caesar, L-I-C-I-T, licit to Caesar. Some people pronounce it licet, but it's licit to Caesar. And what that meant was, we appreciate so much that Caesar grants us the permission to have a church. We acknowledge that, we pay our tax on it, and thank you so much. And so long as you were bowing to Caesar, they didn't really care what you did whatsoever, because ultimately you were saying, the ultimate authority is Caesar. But when the Christians went to Roman City Hall, they said, oh, no, we can't say that we have a church because Caesar allows it. The reality is that Caesar has breath because our God allows it. And because they would not agree to be licit to Caesar, for that reason they were fed to the lions. That's why. And so I look at it today when I see churches that all have the opportunity to be a church, because still in our nation you can be just a church. Higher Ground is a church. We're not a corporation. We would never be a corporation. And people who contribute to Higher Ground give tax-deductible donations. I have the IRS regs that say all that. But you go to a lawyer today, he'll set up a church, and he'll set you up as a corporation. And you are set up as a corporation. And that can create some big problems for you. There are stories, I won't go over them in this class, but I have some stories from different pastors around the country who got in trouble for doing whatever in their churches and began to fight with the government. And it got to the point in some of the cases where they actually bulldozed down the churches, bulldozed them down. And how does that happen? Because they're standing back saying, how can you do this? It's unconstitutional, and you're a communist, and oh my goodness, and all that. But the truth is, that's not the truth. How did it happen? How did that happen? How did they get to a point where they could allow that to happen? Well, if let's say that one of you and myself decide to start a widget factory. We're going to make widgets, whatever those are. And we're going to invest in this thing. So we do get a lawyer, we go down, we get a corporation started, and they issue 100 shares in this corporation. You get 50 shares, I get 50 shares, correct? We're the owners of the corporations. We're the ones who started it. And as time goes on, we can sell our shares, or maybe we take in another partner and he gets some shares, and we've got 100 shares of this corporation. But if we go down and start a church, and you walk out of City Hall or the courthouse, you don't have any shares to the church corporation. And a lot of people mistakenly think, oh, that's because the church doesn't have shares. Well, the truth is that it does have shares, but the pastor doesn't get them. Who gets them? The Secretary of State. He holds the shares. Why? Because the one who really holds the shares is the one who really owns the church. They'll let you use the property and all that kind of stuff as long as you want, as long as you're good. But as soon as you decide to give them some grief, you don't own that church. You're serving at their pleasure. And there are cases where they've even bulldozed down churches. Period. Period. As long as you have a corporation for a church, you are beholden to the state. We would never do that. We tell people all the time not to do that. Some people have left other churches because they've realized the truth of this and realized that, wow, that actually puts a spiritual hold on things and gets in the way. And I believe it does in a lot of ways. But let's go back a little bit. Let's just look at the church and its history and how we ended up with this separation of church and state. You guys all know the story of Patrick Henry, correct? Give me liberty or give me death. We all know that, but Patrick Henry was a lawyer. Why did Patrick Henry say that? Whatever caused him to be that forceful in his belief for freedom? Well, here's the story. He was, I think Virginia, I think he was going to Virginia one day, and he saw a man in stocks in the outside who had been beaten up to some degree. I don't know all the details. He later died from the beating. I do know that. And he was a terrible, terrible criminal. Do you know what he had done? He was preaching without a license. That's the truth. True story. And he died from that. And Patrick Henry was appalled. And that led him on his real championship for freedom with ultimately the give me liberty or give me death. And it cost him his life eventually. And sometime in one of these classes, I'll go into the details of that give me liberty or give me death speech. It was amazing what he did. Incredible. With the warships sitting off the coast of Boston. And so when you look at what we have, what we've been given, I believe pastors all over the place take this because they simply are uneducated. They don't realize what we have as a church. A church exists above the government. If we were ever invaded here and dragged in before any of the authorities, my opening line to any judge would be, excuse me, sir, what is your basis for talking to me? What is your authority? What is the nexus of your jurisdiction? What is the nexus of your jurisdiction? Why do you think you have any jurisdiction over me? And he'd probably say, sir, as a church, blah, blah, blah. Sir, we're not that church you're talking about. Well, what are you? We're a church. We're not your 501c3 corporate creature of the state. We're a church. Now tell me, what part of no law do you not understand? I'm serious. I would have that kind of a conversation with the judge. And he could not in good faith continue with what he was doing. And if he did, it would get overturned eventually. Eventually, we'd go up the food chain, and eventually someone would say, you never had any authority over this guy. None whatsoever. What is your nexus of jurisdiction? Zero. Middleville, this county, which is Herkimer County, thank you. Herkimer County, the state of New York, have no jurisdiction over higher ground, period. And if some cocky official wants to come down someday and try to make that issue, knock yourself out. Knock yourself out. I would be happy to go to whatever courts we need to go to with you because I'm very confident that you have no jurisdiction here, period. Period. They don't have the authority. We are not the creature created by the state that they can have control over. Very important. Very, very important. So, when you look at the people who they do have authority over, you say, well, how did they get authority over you? I thought you told us last week that we had unalienable rights, unalienable rights. You do. But you can contract to do something else if you want to. You're really not contracting your rights away. You're just contracting into something else. That's all it is. You have a right to contract. You have an absolute unlimited right to contract. And the government cannot interfere with your contracts whatsoever. You have that right. So, I'll give you an example. A lot of times people don't understand how powerful a contract is. I have a good working knowledge of law. I'm not a lawyer. But there are some things I don't mind handling at all on my own, like real estate transactions and things like that. Because I understand the law. I understand what it means, what it says. And in fact, I find that more often than not, I'm better versed than many of the lawyers in certain things because they just don't know all this stuff. Their procedure, we do this, we do that. Why do you do that? Well, I don't know. That's how you do it. Just move on, please, Well, I was sitting at a closing one day in another state, and it was this 28-page thing, And I said, wow, what's all this? And the guy says, oh, that's just standard real estate stuff. Sign right here. I was like, standard real estate stuff. Oh, yeah, we do. It's how we do everything here. Just sign right here. I'm like, well, wait a second. I can't just sign right here. What's in here? Well, I don't know. It's all just standard stuff. I said, well, that's fine, but I have to read it first. Well, his chin dropped. Okay, it's 28 pages. All this fine print, seriously. And the people who we were getting the real estate from, their chins dropped because they're paying this lawyer by the hour. And I said, I have to read this. And he's, okay, fine, and gave me his conference room and a cup of coffee, and I had my pen. I came back with a whole bunch of stuff, scratched out. No, I don't agree to that. I don't agree to that. I won't agree to this. I'm not going to do that. No. He didn't know what any of it meant. He probably did if he looked at it. He didn't care. So, all right, fine, we'll take it out. Redo the contract without those things, period. But all those things matter because later, if there's an issue, then a judge who's hearing the case of the issue will say, sir, is that your signature on page 28? Yes. Well, then you agreed to everything. Didn't you read it all? Well, too bad, sir, you agreed. That's your signature. But now it's only 23 pages. So we have to understand what our rights are and how easy it is to contract into something else and become something else. So I want to just look at the First Amendment a little bit. I want to give you a few things here, some stories. Peter Zenger was put on trial in New York in 1735 for exposing the truth about corruption in government. The government had arrested Zenger, for exposing its corruption in his newspaper. The jury saw the wickedness of the bureaucrats and cleared Zenger because he was practicing truth in print. Most importantly, this trial established a very important right, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. What are how many things can you vote for in this country? How many votes do we have? We have votes for our elected officials, of course, right? I mean, obviously at all the different levels. That's not my question. So we can vote for our elected officials, but we have two other votes as well. One is your vote as a juror. Well, I never thought of that. But you do. You have a vote as a juror. It's very important, very powerful. Another vote you have is as a grand juror. And what's a grand jury? We're going to look at these things here for a couple minutes because understanding these powers that we have is very, very important. So today, I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit. I'm jumping around. I just kind of walked into this here. Let me go here. So today, if you're put on trial, a judge will tell you, he'll tell the jury, he'll inform the jury like this. He will say, well, let me give you an example. There's a pastor named John Hagee out of Texas. And he's a pretty big pastor, pretty good guy. And he had a big TV show in Canada for a long time until Canada passed a law that said that outlawed any speech whatsoever against homosexuality. It deemed anything you said against homosexuality as hate speech, and you couldn't speak it. Well, if you are familiar with the Bible, in Romans chapter 1, it talks against homosexuality. And so John Hagee simply read the Bible, Romans chapter 1, and he was banned from television in Canada. And he could have been arrested in Canada, except he wasn't there. I don't know if an arrest warrant was ever issued, but he could have been. And in this country, they're starting to do things like that now. I mean, this was 10 or 20 years ago that happened with John Hagee, and now they're starting to do that kind of stuff here. Why? Simply because we're allowing it. That's the only reason. But you're allowing it because you don't know that you can stand in the way of it and stop it. And here's one of the ways. So let's just say that John or myself was put on trial and charged with speaking hate crimes against homosexuals simply because you read from Romans chapter 1 where God calls it an abomination, period. And then I'm not going to hide anything. I walk into the courtroom and they say, it's reported that you said homosexuality was an abomination. You read the Bible part that says that. Absolutely, I did. We love the homosexuals, but we hate the sin, and we need to warn them because if we don't warn them, they're going to go to hell forever, and I'm going to be charged in front of God's eyes. And no, absolutely, I would never deny having said that, period. So now they have a little trial, and there's not much of a trial because I admitted to it. And this is what the judge would say to the jury. The judge would say to the jury, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you find that Pastor Massad actually read Romans chapter 1 and spoke against homosexuals, then you must find him guilty of violating this hate law. Period. And whatever else he'd say beyond that. But that's how he would instruct a jury. That's how judges instruct juries today. That's not how you're supposed to. So, as a juror, if I understand that I have a vote and that vote gives me the authority to nullify a bad law, then I can nullify that bad law. And if I were on the jury, this is how it would go inside the jury room. I'd say, yeah, the judge said that, but there's a reason the judge isn't here. He can't control us in here. We can do what we want. And that law is no law. They can't make a law against religion. That's what the Constitution says. Period. They can make no law against a religion, and that's what the Bible says. They're not above God's law. And so the jury could say, and frequently does say, well, we have our verdict, and they go out and they give the verdict, and the judge is all happy because he knows that the pastor admitted that he was reading from Romans chapter 1. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached the verdict? The foreperson stands up. Yes, Judge, we have. In the matter of the state of New York versus Pastor Massad, speaking against homosexuality, how do you find him? Guilty or not guilty? Not guilty, Judge. So say you, Madam Foreperson? Yep. Members of the jury? Yep. End discussion. It's over. We have nullified the law. We don't care at all what your law is. We don't care how you've twisted and perverted and stretched things. We know that we have the right to shut down tyranny even in the jury room. Very important. That's why we have that. Jury nullification is what it's called. Now, if you are ever called for jury duty and you don't want to serve on the jury, all you have to do is tell the judge, sir, I am so happy to be here, and I can't wait to get on this jury because I believe in jury nullification. I'm going to teach all the jurors about that. Okay, you're dismissed. Go home. They'd send you home in a minute. They really would, too. They wouldn't have anything to do with it. And so it is our obligation to try not just the facts of the case, but the law also. That is part of our responsibility as jurors. And so what about you see, some of the things in law, especially regarding juries, are sacrosanct. For example, do you all know what double jeopardy is? Yes? You can't be charged twice for the same crime? Okay. How many of you know who Hammurabi was? You ever heard of Hammurabi? Okay. Hammurabi was the first person to ever make a uniform set of laws in the history of mankind. And you go on the internet, you can find the Code of Hammurabi. It's not long, 50 pages or something, and it says if you commit adultery, this happens. If you steal, that happens. If you do this, if you do that. It's got all these things. But the Code of Hammurabi had a clause in it against double jeopardy. If you were found innocent, you can't ever be tried for that again. Now, every major nation and every set of laws written by men has always had, from the Code of Hammurabi to today, including the Soviet Union, has always had a clause against double jeopardy, including the United States. Now, I want to explain how important that is, how powerful that is. So, let's just say that someone was put on trial for shooting someone, okay? And it's a long trial, and they killed the person, and it's finally the day of the jury is ready to return its verdict. And while the trial's going on, you're fixing your security camera, because this guy lived across the street and it's been broken for a long time, but you realize, oh my goodness, my security camera wasn't broken. I just couldn't see it. It's been recording this whole time. So you kind of whip back to the day of the murder, and you say, oh my goodness, and you can see the defendant walk right up, point the gun at the person and kill him and walk away. So you say, oh my goodness, I got to get to the court. So you get in your car, you pack up your security camera, and you go racing to the court to show the judge. And while you're getting close to the court, the jury returns. Mr. Foreman, do you have a verdict? Yes, we do, Judge. How say you in the matter of the state of such and such versus so-and-so? Judge, in the matter of the case of murder, in the case of the state versus so-and-so, we, the jury, find him not guilty. So say you, Madam, Mr. Foreman? Yes, I do. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury? Yes, we do. Mr. So-and-so, you are free. With that, You burst into the door and you, judge, hold it, you got to see this, And you put the TV up and you show the video. He shoots the guy clearly. It's very clear on the video. What does the judge say at that moment? Sir, you are free to leave. He can't say anything else. That's it. He got away with it. You got the golden ticket on this one. He can't do anything else. That's how important, that's how strong this double jeopardy clause is. Now, if he got there before the jury read the verdict, that's a different story. But once the verdict has been announced and accepted, double jeopardy is now in play. Now, what is our government doing? Do you remember who George Zimmer is? Remember that name? You probably remember the name George Zimmer. He was a neighborhood watch security guy, and young Trayvon Martin was going through his neighborhood, and did Trayvon confront George first? I think George probably approached Trayvon first. Hey, kid, what are you doing here? And allegedly, Trayvon Martin hit George first. Did George grab Trayvon and spin him around first? I don't really know. I really don't know. I always thought that was a very sad situation. If their paths hadn't crossed, both of them would have gone on in life and not probably had too many issues. Trayvon would have grown up and not been the punk that he was at 17 or 16, and just life would have gone on. So it was really very unfortunate. But after George Zimmer was adjudged to be not guilty. Now, if he was guilty, all the liberals would have been all excited about the court verdict. And yes, our legal system prevailed, and he was proven guilty. But when he was adjudged to be not guilty, they weren't happy with that. So they decided to throw out double jeopardy and charge him with a federal civil rights violation. And you say, they'll say immediately, well, it's a whole different thing. No, it's not. It's the same thing. You're just coming up with as a bunch of snakes trying to find a way around double jeopardy. That's all. We're going to charge him federally now with civil rights violations. That's all it is. That really is all it is. And so, again, this all happens because we the people are fat, dumb, and happy, worried about who's left on the island and not paying attention to what's going on in Washington. And these people are just getting away with it. We send these people there to take care of business for us, and they are getting away with all this stuff, big time. So I jumped into that. I want to come back a little bit, but throughout history, I want to tell you that the worst enemy of people, the worst enemy has been their governments. If you look at their own governments, that's the worst one. You look at the incredible history of the communist countries, Vietnam, and I'm drawing up China and Russia, of course, and the tens of millions of people that have been slaughtered by their own governments. And the very first thing they did with all of them was to disarm them. We'll come back to that in a minute because we're going to talk about the Second Amendment. I'm jumping around a little bit. But Thomas, and it's happened here in this country too. I don't know how many of you know the name Ruby Ridge, or Kent State, or Ohio State, or Waco, Texas. Those were pretty outrageous things that were done by our government against U.S. citizens. And where is the outrage of the people to demand accountability for those things? What happened at Waco was outrageous. If you listen to the press a little bit, you would think that it was this new group of radical cultists who were sacrificing kids out there, and thank God the government got there when they did. But the reality is that the Branch Davidians had been there for 40 plus years and had lived in peace in the community, and they made you think that David Koresh, I'm not a fan of David Koresh at all, they would make you think that David Koresh was this recluse who was there doing all these horrible things all the time. In reality, the man went to breakfast every day at the local Walmart or wherever, and they could have arrested him there if they wanted to, but they wanted to make this big, ATF wanted to make this big show and this big standoff. Netflix played a 6-part documentary kind of movie thing. It was amazing. I'm very acquainted with all of the things that happened there at at Waco. That documentary was fantastically done, detail for detail, minute for minute. The only thing that they did wrong in the end of it was they made the antagonist in the movie look like he was generally upset that, oh my goodness, they're dying in there, let's get in and rescue them. That never happened. He was a bad guy from the beginning. Every other fact in that movie was spot on. Dick DeGuerin was the attorney, a very famous Texas attorney, who actually made it into the ranch there to see David Koresh. And they tried to stop him from going in, but he's a good lawyer. They had requested him. Well, how do you know they requested him? Well, there was a sign up there that said, David DeGuerin, come in, be our lawyer. And so he went in. And the one mistake that Mr. Koresh made that could have solved the whole situation, I do believe that the ATF wanted to kill all of them. I really do. I know that sounds horrible, but when you look at what happened that day, and I'll go back to that in a second, they wanted to make a point after what happened. And when David Koresh entertained Dick DeGuerin, the lawyer, Dick DeGuerin said, "Walk out with me now. I can protect you. This will all work." And the truth is, had he done that, they could not have killed anybody. The thing would have been over. And ultimately, the surviving Branch Davidians prevailed in court because what the ATF did that day, the raid they did was totally illegal. And they fired first. I mean, I've seen the steel, not steel, but the storm doors that were in the front of the building, and you can see the bullet holes all going in. You know, I mean, the ATF said, no, they fired us first. And it was very clear. And that's why eventually they did win. So the big mistake that Mr. Koresh made was not walking out with David DeGuerin, because he would have, or Dick DeGuerin, I think, and because he would have definitely prevailed in the case in the long run. So what's the point? The point is, even our government does things. Ruby Ridge, Ruby Ridge, Idaho, was another case, and where this family was slaughtered up there. And why am I drawing a blank with the name? We actually had him. I got together with the father there and did a show with him some years later about what happened there. And he was still crushed up that his wife and child were murdered there. And again, the same person who was in charge of Ruby Ridge was the guy who was in charge of Waco, Texas. Why have these people never been brought to justice? I mean, they should be. It's only all that has to happen for that to happen is the American people have to stand up and say, no, stop. We're not doing this. We want that person brought to justice. That's not how we as Americans believe. That's not how we're going to act. We're not going to allow that, and it wouldn't happen. But people have forgotten what they do have for rights. So we're looking at it here. The First Amendment guarantees that the government cannot interfere in our exercise of religion, alternative health care, teaching our children in homeschooling. We have freedom of speech. They can't interfere with any of that stuff. Freedom of religion is liberty from a lot of things. Is it freedom from Social Security number? I don't know. What's a Social Security number? I don't know. Is it freedom from other registrations? Or do I need a license to earn a living? Why do I need a license to earn a living? I'm just putting those thoughts out there. But these are things that today we simply accept as, well, of course that's what you do. But there was a day when none of that was true. 80 years ago, 70 years ago, you could have lived an entire lifetime and never, ever come in contact with federal agents. Today, it's almost impossible to get away from them on a weekly basis. There's so much entanglement. Go back in history a little bit. How many of you remember Richard Nixon? Right? You do. I'll talk about him at some point maybe, but I will say this. He ended up losing his presidency because he bugged a hotel room, basically. Today, our leaders have the whole nation bugged. They're listening to every conversation, every email they're reading, every transaction is being logged and monitored and tracked. Why is that happening? There's a multi-billion-dollar facility in Utah that has the highest speed computers, and every transaction is going through it. Why is that? Why are we allowing that? Oh, it's to stop terrorism. It's got nothing to do with terrorism. It has everything to do with the control you tend to put on American people. American people could stop it tomorrow. Every one of us could stand up and say, by the way, Mr. Congressman, that's an issue. If everyone said to their congressman tomorrow, that's an issue, all of a sudden the next week you'd see on CNN and Fox and every place else, Congress has launched a new investigation today. What's the constitutionality of this amazing facility in Utah? Every single person who's there gathering information is breaking federal law. Every single person. Where is the courage? Where is the demand from the people to stand up and say, no, we're not doing that. You can't do that. You cannot do that. You don't have the authority, and we're not going to allow it. Well, we're just keeping you safe. No, we're going to be safe from you. We're going to get you out of office and put real people in there who will do what the people want to do. When George Bush, the younger George Bush, was president, he was running for re-election, and the Republican national campaign, convention rather, was in Boston. And that's where I'm from. And so I paid close attention to it. And they set up a free speech zone. It was located a couple of miles away from the convention center, the Heinz Convention Center, which is where they had the convention. It was located under a highway overpass. They had put chain link fence 100 yards down one side, 100 yards down the other side. And inside that chain link fence was the free speech zone. Why did anybody put up with that? Why wasn't every single person who was there out there in the streets in front of the Heinz Convention Center protesting? Why would you do that? Why would anyone ever go into that? Now, I believe in free speech zones. The one I know about exists from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, from the Canadian border to the Mexican border. That's the free speech zone. And nothing else is acceptable. And then a few months later, when the Democrats had their convention, it was in New York City, and they had to get permits to have demonstrations. I'm sorry, permits to have demonstrations? What in the world? Why would anyone ever do that? Why would anyone ever put up with that? I mean, do women have the right to vote today because they get permits from City Hall to go down and have protests? Heck no. Heck no. Why would we ever allow our servants to treat us that way? Because we've forgotten that they are our servants, and we have the complete authority over them. They have no ability to regulate them. I want to read this here. The Constitution grants no authority to force free people to contract with private companies, such as banks, law firms, or insurance companies. Now bankers want legislation to insert tracking devices into currency. Now they're actually going a step further. They want actually to have electronic currency that they can actually program for you. We've talked about that. And they want to have a hoarding tax to be imposed if cash is held too long. Cash businesses are being seized unconstitutionally for upholding legal upholding legal tender laws. And so this is just all of this can stop if the people get together, realize who they are, and go, no. You might have business as usual has been going on for a while, but it's time that comes to an end. Tyrants never like it when you do that. We have a right. How many of you know that we have a right to travel? You know that, right? We have a constitutional right to travel. Well, there is no actual constitutional right to travel. You won't find that any place in the Constitution. What we do have is a right in the First Amendment to peaceably assemble. Well, I can't assemble if I can't travel to get there. And so I have a de facto right to travel. But in no place in the Constitution does it say you have a right to travel. But that's implied by your right to peaceably assemble. Now, these are rights that are given to us by God. No constitution gives them to us. They exist. These rights exist above our government. The Constitution, as I've told you already, gives you no rights whatsoever. What it does is it protects your rights by limiting government. Period. So does government have the authority to shut down our societies and lock us in our homes? Heck no. Absolutely not. Well, what if it's a pandemic? I'm sorry. If you can find the clause in the Constitution that says all your rights disappear when someone says there's a pandemic and come to find out, gee, it wasn't really what they said it was. Okay? So if you can lose all of your rights at that point, if you can find a place in the Constitution that tells me that, then I'll change my opinion, but it doesn't exist. We were not living in Massachusetts when the bombing happened at the Boston Marathon. I remember watching it on TV. We were out someplace, and I looked over, and I actually, it was the finish line, and oh my goodness, this explosion! I jumped up. What's going on? And some people think that it was staged, that our government was involved in it. Whether they were or not, I'll leave all that aside for the moment. I want to come to what they did. The next day, they locked down Boston. Nobody was allowed out while they hunted for the Tsarnaev brothers throughout Boston. Guys, if I was in Boston, I would have driven everywhere that day. I would have been all over the roads. You do not have the authority to lock down this city. You don't have that authority. That's the first time I ever heard of locking down a city. Shelter in place, that's the order. You don't order me to do anything. You don't order my freedoms away. I have a right to travel, and you do not have a right to stop me. But nobody did that. Everybody cowered in their homes. Oh, let's get out of the way. Good Lord, what's wrong with people? What is wrong with people? Shame on them. Our founding fathers would be so ashamed that Americans would do things like that. They don't, and they still don't have the authority to lock us down. period. Or to make us wear masks or anything else. I wouldn't wear masks either. Oh, Pastor, you're a rabble rouser. Yep. Praise God. You know, the truth is, no man can serve two masters. Either we're free and we're serving God, or you're a slave and you're serving the state. But no man can serve two masters, period. That's why we're not a corporation either. We have a master. His name is Jesus. We're not a corporation. You know, when you look at Congress shall make no law against religion, then it says you can't abridge speech either. Then it says you can't abridge the press. Okay? Then it says the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. I've addressed a few of these things. I'm going to address the press right now. So when George Bush was president, the second one, well, with freedom of the press, back up. If I have a right to travel, why do I need a license? Why do I need a license if I have a right to travel? I'm just asking a question. I'm not giving an answer, but maybe you'd ask the question too. And if you could find a real answer, then maybe you would promote licenses. But if you understood what that is and what rights you have and what rights that might actually violate, then maybe you'd think twice about that. And if we have a freedom of the press, you know, I remember as a kid, I remember the Vietnam War. I remember the ugly pictures coming back on the TV news every night. I was young. I was 10, 12 years old. I remember all that. And some of you are older than me, and you remember it. And some of you were probably of fighting age at that time, and draft age, and that kind of stuff. And so you remember all that stuff. It was an ugly scene. And the constant reporting did definitely help to change the opinion of people in America. It was like, whoa, why are we doing this? What is this? Look at all these flag-draped caskets coming home every day. What is the purpose of all this? Because we had real reporters, that story was put out. Because we had real reporters, Watergate happened. Reporters asked real questions. Reporters dug. Hey, what? We're not accept these answers. We want more answers. But during George Bush's presidency, during the Iraq War, the press was not allowed to show images of flag-draped caskets. Why would the press ever have agreed to be censored in any way? In any way. Why would the press put up with that? I'll tell you why. They want access. Because they say, well, if we show pictures of that, then they won't invite us into the press conferences anymore. If you show pictures of that and you do what you're supposed to as a reporter, they won't be in your way anymore. You'll absolutely be able to have a better leader who will do the right things, period. And so the freedom of the press is very important. One of our founders, it was Jefferson who said, if I had a choice between a free government or a free press, I'd take a free press, because sooner or later we'd have a free government. And that's just the truth of it. We don't have a free press today. What we have instead is a propaganda machine. Well, I couldn't think of the name propaganda. The word propaganda, I'm not sure. But that's what we've got today is a propaganda media. That's all it is. And they're being fed the official story and they repeat it. So they can have access. So I can go into the White House briefing room. Well, in 2013, some of you might remember this. It's actually a small case, but I remember it because it stood right out at the time. The press woke up really fast. Because what happened? What happened to make them wake up really fast? Well, the government tried to seize records from the Associated Press to find out who the source of a particular story was. And like that, the press woke up. We have freedom of the press. We have freedom of the press. And the White House briefing room was like a WWF rally. Oh my goodness. One reporter would ask a question, the White House would, well, you know, it's what, and the other reporter would charge in with another question, hammering on it, and because their right was assaulted. Well, guys, I got to tell you, the right for the freedom of the press is right there with exercising religion. It's right there with freedom of speech. It's right there with peaceably assemble, and it's right there with redress of grievances, period. And the press should be as excited about any of those other things being abridged as they were when the right about their job, their function was challenged, period. And we trust them to let everybody know what we have. What's really going on in the country, what we're really having in the country. We need to have a free press. We need to have that. We don't have that right now. I've said for a long time, I believe the number one problem in America is the press. And I can prove it this way. not that we'll ever get the opportunity. Let us take over, and I'm not talking about with arms, let us take over the press for 90 days, maybe 4 months at most. And we're not going to do anything except report the stuff that they're not reporting. At the end of the 90 days, everybody in America would be screaming for a remedy for the bioweapon that they've been injected with. Everybody in America would be willing to hang Joe Biden and his son for the treason that they've done on America, on and on and on and on. But they simply don't report any of this stuff, and for some reason, people put up with it. Why? I have no idea. But by the way, did you see what happened on the Super Bowl? Oops, never mind. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. I want you to listen to something that Aristotle said. The tyrant controls every movement of the citizens. He keeps them under a perpetual servitude. He has spies everywhere, spreads dissension, impoverishes the citizens, and is obliged to make war to keep his subjects occupied. That's from 384 BC. Anything new under the sun? That's exactly what's going on now. Do you realize that last week Russia moved tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus, right outside of Ukraine? Do you realize that? Do you realize that China just spent, the President-in-Chief from China just spent 3 days with Vladimir Putin? My goodness, did anybody see the video of what happened when they left? As Mr. Xi, as President Xi was leaving the Kremlin, they were at the door on the sidewalk. You had video of them coming down the stairs with their entourages, and the interpreters, of course, are there right there, just firing things back and forth in real time as the leaders are speaking. And they got to the sidewalk, and Xi said words to the effect of, "We are about to see a complete change in world order like there has not been in over 100 years, and you, my friend, are helping to bring it to pass." That's what's happening right now. There was no chance before the present regime took power in Washington. There was no chance whatsoever of China and Russia uniting. It just wasn't a chance. Wasn't even on anybody's tea leaves anywhere. But now it is happening. Those are two strong nations to get together and change the balance of power in the world. That will not end well for us, period. The rights that are granted to us in the First Amendment are so important to us. And the biggest one that's being let down right now is the freedom of the press. Privacy is a very, very important element of freedom. It is an essential element of freedom. This podium is made of wood, right? You take away wood and you'll have a few nails on the ground and maybe some glue, correct? And so this podium is made of wood. Wood is an essential element without which you can't have this podium. Privacy is an essential element of liberty and freedom. If you don't have it, you don't have freedom, period. And privacy is being assaulted every place today. A quote from Thomas Erskine, "The press must be free. It has always been so in our nation, and much evil has been corrected by it. If the government finds itself annoyed by the press, then let it examine its own conduct, and it will find the cause." There have been some great thinkers in history who have had an awful lot to say. I want to read you a scripture here. In the book of James, chapter 5, verse 12, it says this: "But above all things, my brethren, swear not, neither by heaven, neither by earth, neither by any other oath, but let your yea be yea, and your nay be nay, lest you fall into condemnation." So our word is very, very important. And not taking an oath as a Christian is very, very important. What's the first thing that happens when you walk into a courtroom? Raise your right hand and repeat after me, please. You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. As Christians, what should we do when they do that? Go, "I'm sorry, I don't take any oaths." Now, what do they have to do at that point? They have to accommodate you. So they will simply say, "Will you affirm that what you're going to say is true?" "Yes, I'll affirm that. My yea is going to be yea, my nay is going to be nay. I'll affirm that I'm going to tell the truth. Period. But so many people get sucked into this thing. I could go on and on about the ways that the court kind of works against our standing and our status as Christians and as people. But at any rate, I want to look at one more thing about the First Amendment, and that is the right to petition for redress of grievances. Now, if I were to ask any of you, what does that mean? Most of you probably wouldn't know. And so I'm going to just kind of jump into it. So petitioning for redress of grievances, most people have been under the impression that redress of grievances means if I don't like a law, then I go to my legislators, and I tell them, hey, we need to change this law. And that's how we redress our grievances. But that's not how we redress grievances. That's how we get them to propose legislation. How do we redress grievances? Well, for that we need the fourth branch of government, which is the third vote that we have, and that is the grand jury. So what is the grand jury? Very, 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 very important thing, very powerful thing. The grand jury is we the people bringing an indictment, a request that someone be charged with a crime, or at least investigated, charged with a crime, and then it should go to court and be decided. And we the people can get together and charge, as the grand jury can charge anybody for anything, including public officials, which is really what it's there for. But what's happened through the years is the prosecutors have taken control of the door to the grand jury. And good luck getting before a grand jury with a complaint against a public official. Good luck doing that. I have some friends who do that and have had moderate success with it, but it's difficult to get past the grand jury. One of them has gone a couple of times to the grand jury and with a sealed envelope. Well, what is this? And he'll say to the prosecutor, he'll say, it's none of your business. It has to do with you. Get out of my way. So he's into fighting with the grand jurors, with prosecutors about that. But that's the reality. The whole purpose of the grand jury was to be able to have a place where citizens could go to redress the grievances that they have. Period. So if I have an objection that this mayor is a criminal or that representative is a criminal, I have to have a place to go. So we can go before the grand jury and we can say, here's the evidence, and we can present it, and they can look at it and they go, hey, Pastor, I don't know what your problem is, but we've known all this stuff forever, and it's not a problem because we know about this, we know about that. Or they can say, oh my goodness, this needs to be looked at. And when a grand jury is presented evidence, they hear the case, they have two options. They can indict a person if they believe that there is a likelihood of a crime that has been committed, or they can no bill, it's called, when they refuse to indict, period. And a grand jury is we the people bringing the charge. That's what the grand jury is. But a grand jury has 24 members. I believe it's 24 members in all states. And your vote as a grand juror is a very, very important vote as well, because you're holding as a grand juror, you can also propose that a case be heard. You can say, hey, when the grand jury is seated, hey, I think that something needs to be investigated. And if you knew your rights and the prosecutor went, well, wait a second here, I'm telling you what case you can hear. No, Mr. Prosecutor. We have the authority to decide what cases we're going to hear and to propose one. Sit down, sir. Most people don't know their rights, so they'd never do that to the prosecutor. They'd fall victim to, well, I'm the one to decide. No. We have the authority to decide, especially the foreman of the grand jury. He has all kinds of authority. All kinds of authority. And so that's really a big thing, and it's a thing that has, because it's been wrestled away from the people and held by the prosecutor, criminality in government runs amok because there's no check and balance for it. Well, if you don't like him, vote him out of office. Yeah, good luck with that. What if we could bring the evidence and bring them to trial? Look what's happening with Mr. Biden. Denying all these payments till finally the bank records came. Does anybody know where the bank records came from? China. They've got the bank records from China. Couldn't get them from anybody here. Everywhere, this good old boy club got it all knotted up. Couldn't get the evidence. Now they've got the evidence. Congress is very upset about this. Where did all these millions of dollars go? How come there are all these payments to all of your family members? Excuse me, what's going on here? With communist China? Oh my goodness. So it's an important thing. So let's go to the Second Amendment, now that I've explained the first one. Any questions on the First Amendment? You have a question? Okay.
Question. You mentioned double jeopardy.
Double jeopardy, yep.
Isn't that, the hate law is a double jeopardy
The hate law, well, if our hate law is a double jeopardy issue, they could be if you were charged on something else and found innocent, but a hate law itself, it's the only place you're charged, would not necessarily be a violation of double jeopardy.
Well, the fact is, it goes to motive. I killed him because I hated him.
Yeah, but it's still the same crime. It's what they've done is they've made a more serious crime if you killed him because you hated him, and that's not necessarily double jeopardy. You agree or disagree? It's just not double jeopardy.
If you're found not guilty, then how do you have the second one?
Well,
he's not guilty. Well, I hated him. And
Yep.
it violated his civil rights.
Right, well, again, if that was the only way you were charged, if you're only charged with the one hate crime, and you were convicted, then that would be, I don't see double jeopardy there. If you were charged with murder and then got away, and then they charged you with the hate crime because you didn't like that race of people or whatever, and charged you again, that would be double jeopardy. If they came at you for civil rights violations, even though you were acquitted on the other one, that's really double jeopardy is really what they're doing. And we just shouldn't put up with that. Just like I told you last week, the Constitution's call for a 12-man jury. And in many places and many different things, they make a 6-man jury. And people just let that happen. It's like, no, the reason they're doing that is because now they have half the chance of their case against you being rejected, period. That's why we have 12-man jury. And that was set up because our founding fathers understood biblical principles, and they saw the 12 apostles and all that kind of stuff. So that's why they said, okay, let's do that, 12-man juries. All right, so let's look at the Second Amendment. This is a very important one. Listen careful. All the words matter. By the way, let's read it first. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, the first thing to notice about the Second Amendment is its placement. Its placement is right after the First Amendment. They say, well, of course 2 comes after 1. Well, no. 2 is the well-regulated militia for a reason, right after number 1. Because number 1 extols the freedoms that we hold so dear and so important to having a free society. And the Second Amendment is put right here to say, and this is how we will defend it. That's why it's here. The Second Amendment is here for that reason. So a lot of people say that the Second Amendment is a guarantee to have guns. But that's not what the Second Amendment says. Listen careful. Back then, everybody had guns. You foraged for food. You shot squirrels and you shot pheasants and you shot deer and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you go to the store and buy stuff too. But everybody had guns. Everybody went hunting for food. The Second Amendment had nothing to do with owning a gun. The Second Amendment starts out this: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The Second Amendment is to have a militia. Now, some people will convince you that, or they'll try to make the case that, we don't have militias anymore because we have an army. Back then, they needed the militia because they didn't have an army. Not true. They had the Continental Army back then. And the Continental Army was there to defend the nation. So then what was the militia for? The militia has always had the same purpose. It's necessary to the security of a free state. What's that talking about? Well, I've read their writings, and all of you can read their writings too. You can look at these books. They're everywhere. You can find them online. The guarantee was the ability for a militia to form. Form against what? Against tyrants. These founding fathers understood that the greatest threat to freedom was their own government. They had lived under tyranny their whole lives. They saw how impossible it was to shake off tyranny. They saw the incredible burden that they had shaking it off. So they said, I could reword this a little bit. If you want to have a free nation, you need a militia. It's necessary. Because when the tyrants show up, they won't just leave. You're going to need to go in and put bullets in their heads, drag them out, and have free elections again. And their writings make that very, very clear. Remember I told you last week, the intent of a law is very, very important to administering it. And their writings make it abundantly clear. It's funny, I've talked to some lawyers, and you say that to them, oh, where'd you get that? I read the law. Did you ever? Well, no, that's ridiculous that they'd ever promote that. No, that's exactly what they promoted. They understood it. In fact, I have some videos of FEMA trainers talking to FEMA personnel, telling them that our founding fathers were terrorists. You know, just ridiculous. You know, the litmus test that they put on the Second Amendment when they look at a gun is they say, well, the litmus test, I remember Andrew Cuomo saying this, does it pass the hunting test? To which I say, what does hunting have to do with the Second Amendment? Unless you understand what it really means, and then I guess, yes, this gun would work for hunting down politicians who had gone rogue. But I don't say that out loud too often. But that's what it's for. And anyone who wants to tell you otherwise, they're not telling you the truth. So they knew that the only way that you could keep a secure state was that by letting politicians know that the people are ready to put bullets in their heads. That's the truth. We better be careful what we do. You know, our founding fathers said, when a people fear the government, they have tyranny. When the government fears the people, they have freedom. It's very, very true. Very, very true. Defense of person and property is a natural right given by our Creator. Second Amendment defends that. Our forefathers took up arms against King George's tax collectors because of excessive and unlawful taxes. Remember, it was 17%. They thought that was outrageous. And they had other taxes. They said, no, it's not lawful. You can't impose that on us. By the way, what's happening today with our tax collectors? 87,000 new IRS agents armed to the 83,000 that already exist. That is the largest standing army in the United States, bigger than all of the militias put together. I mean, all of the National Guard put together. Anybody understand that that might be a serious problem in the not too distant future? At least Mr. McCarthy has made noise about simply not funding it, and that is the prerogative of the House of Representatives. They control the purse strings. So he could do that, and hopefully he does, because it's absolutely preposterous that would be put up against the American people. They're not there for no reason. They're not there to keep politicians in line. They are there to come and harass everybody, and they're armed. So you know that. That's a real problem. So gun control is what they're trying to do. They keep doing all these things to make it look like we need it. Well, it worked well for the communist governments who slaughtered millions of people in Poland and Russia and Latvia and China and all those places. There's a movie called Innocence Betrayed. And it's not innocence, it's innocent. Innocent people, innocence betrayed. It's about 55 minutes. And if you can find it, Innocence Betrayed, it is stunning, and it gives you country for country for country what happened when they disarmed the populations over the last 70 or 80 years. Absolutely no question. The only reason for disarming peoples is to kill them, to slaughter them, and that's what they do every time. Oh, that's silly. That would never happen here. Okay. Arms in the hand of the citizen may be used by the individual. This is John Adams, by the way. Listen to what John Adams said. Listen carefully. Arms in the hands of the citizen may be used at individual discretion for the defense of the country, the overthrow of tyranny, or private self-defense. Does that sound like you need to go and get orders from someone? May be used at individual discretion to overthrow tyranny. In a free nation, firearms are not licensed or regulated or registered. The only reason to register a firearm is so they know where to come and take it when they want to take it. Period. Oh, no, we have to make sure bad people don't get guns. The nation is full of bad people with guns. Period. You did a bad job making sure bad people didn't get guns. So the good people are going to have guns to defend themselves. Thomas Paine said this: arms discourage and keep the invader and plunderer in awe, and preserve order in the world as well as property. Horrid mischief would ensue were the law-abiding deprived of the use of them. Pretty simple. I want to read another quote to you. Thomas Jefferson also wrote this: I know of no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves. He's talking about guns. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take the guns from them, but to inform them of their discretion by education. Period. The only place that guns can be trusted is with the people themselves. That's what Thomas Jefferson said. These are our founding fathers. Why did they talk like that? Because they lived under tyranny. They watched what happened. They knew what happened. They knew how it went every single time. Every single time. I want to talk about staying with the Second Amendment for a second. Our founding fathers left us two remedies for problems. What are they? Ballots and bullets. That's the truth. People don't like it when you talk like that, but pay attention. Ballots and bullets. We can make it with the ballots, but we better get busy soon because people are getting into authority and into power who have no intention of honoring the Constitution, who have every intention of destroying it, who have every intention of disarming you. Did our founding fathers know what they were doing? Look at what they did. Look at this nation that they put together. Look, one of the most amazing documents ever, the Constitution. Just, it's amazing. You know, they were Christian guys, most of them. And I really believe without divine inspiration, they never could have done what they did. As a pastor, I can tell you right now how difficult it is to get a group of pastors to decide what they're going to have for lunch. Okay? And good luck getting a group of church people together to decide what's going to be for a banquet and where's it going to be and how the hall's going to be decorated and all that stuff. But somehow, they were able to form a nation. It is nothing short of a miracle that a nation formed. If you've ever been involved in something where you're working with groups of people and all the different thoughts and concerns that go into it, and mix that with people who, on top of that, some of them have terrible egos, mix that with other people who have tremendous agendas, and oh my goodness, it's so difficult to put it together. So it's really nothing short of a miracle. And it kept our country well for 200 plus years. And it's only since we've been ignoring it that things have been really falling apart. And we can get back to it. We really can. Why did, again, we're still talking about gun control. Why did, you all know the shot heard round the world, the battle at Concord and Lexington? You know, it was Lexington Green, I believe. Why did that happen? What was going on there? Why did that occur? Why were the Minutemen, really the farmers, withstanding the British troops there? Why? Most people don't know why. Because the British had decided this was the time they were coming to take the guns. Exactly. They were coming to take the guns. And the farmers said, hey, we've put up with all of your garbage. You're not taking our guns. Because we know at that point, it's over. And that's why the shot heard around the world. That's why that event happened. That's what started the Civil War. The War for Independence, I'm sorry. Okay? And I'm telling you now, they're coming to take your guns. They keep doing it time and time again. Good luck getting them. They're not going to get them. There are over 300 million guns in the country. There's no way they're going to get them. Plenty of good people will stand against them. They might get guns a night or two, but once word gets out, there'll be plenty of people waiting to resist them. They are not going to get them. And people say, well, they'll declare martial law, and then we can't fight it. Baloney. They declared martial law not too long ago and committed the entire U.S. military, and it didn't work in Iraq, and it's not going to work here. Period. They can't do it. They won't get away with it. I don't care how much they try to scare people to think that they can get away with it. I told you last week in Communist China, heavy police state, all the military and everything else. When the people finally stood up and said, you're not doing this anymore, Xi backed down. So, okay, no more lockdowns, we're done. Because he knew if all the people in China said, we're done, he was done. They'd find his body dragged through the street. Period. Same thing is true. There is no such thing as gun control. It's people control. And you have people who are trying to work outside the Constitution using legal methods. For example, George Soros, who keeps buying gun manufacturing facilities and closing them down. That's a problem. Why are we allowing that? Why are we sitting back and letting that happen? Homeland Security, a few years ago, purchased 1 billion rounds of ammunition. 1 billion rounds. You might remember that. That's a lot of ammunition. They did it to buy up ammunition so people couldn't have it. In the whole Iraq war, we fired about 60 million rounds of ammunition. Why are they buying 1 billion rounds of ammunition? And exactly who are they fighting? Planning to fight. James Madison said this, Americans have the right and advantage of being armed, unlike citizens of other countries whose governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. All of a sudden, our government seems to be afraid to trust our people with arms. Samuel Adams said this, Military power will never awe a sensible American to tamely surrender his guns. That's good. Thomas Jefferson again said this: the Constitution of most of our states and the U.S. Constitution assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves, that it is their right and their duty to be armed at all times. That's our founding fathers. Let's take a short break, a few minutes, and we'll talk about the Third Amendment, and I'll start with a video when we come back.
So the Biden administration has made a practice now for over 2 years of picking federal judges based on the way they look, based instead of their competence. And the confirmation hearings for these judges are as painful as you would expect they would be. Ketanji Brown Jackson famously said she can't define a woman, and yet she's somehow in the Supreme Court. Another judicial nominee in Washington state couldn't explain what Article 2 of the Constitution is. Wants to be a federal judge. And then there's the latest, a guy called Cato Cruz. It's Biden's nominee to a federal judgeship. How did he do in the hearings? Well, here's a clip.
Tell me how you analyze a Brady motion.
How I analyze a Brady motion?
Yes.
Senator, in my 4.5 years on the bench, don't believe I've had the occasion to address a Brady motion in my career.
Do you know what a Brady motion is?
Senator, in my time on the bench, I've not had occasion to address that, and so it's not coming to mind at the moment what a Brady motion is.
Right. He later guessed it must have something to do with gun control because President Reagan's press secretary was called Brady, and he got shot and his wife became a gun control advocate. Right. So this is not a small question to miss. The Brady that Senator Kennedy referred to emanates from the Supreme Court case that requires government to turn over exculpatory evidence to the defense. That's the core of our justice system. By the way, that's the rule the DOJ violated in hundreds of cases of January 6th defendants. This guy, who wants to be a federal judge, had no clue what it was. That's a deal ender right there. No, you can't be a federal judge. Sorry, go do something useful with your life. You can't be a judge. You probably will be. Ned Ryan is CEO of American Majority. He joins us tonight. Ned Ryan, thanks so much. I don't know what is going on, but when they start, look, it's fine if you have flaky sociology professors or administrators at Stanford or whatever, who cares? But airline pilots, heart surgeons, and federal judges, like, why are we allowing this?
Well, I think this is the entire point for progressives. I mean, you have a judge that doesn't know Article 2 or Article 5 of the Constitution. This gentleman that doesn't know the Brady motion, the Brady rule. Again, as you pointed out, where hundreds, if not thousands of Americans are being denied this basic right because of their political views. Well, there are a couple things going on here, Tucker. First, they are diversity hires. They're hoping to skate by on their skin or gender or sexual preferences. But it really does highlight that the Biden administration, whoever's actually running it, is putting up activists masquerading as judges because the whole point is to get more votes to rubber stamp the left's social and political agenda. But even more so, Tucker, as you think about progressives, they've always viewed the Constitution and the law as obstacles to be avoided, but even more so, maybe dismantled. So why would you even bother knowing about it? Because you're not going to pay attention to them anyway. And the whole point of progressivism from day one until today is to dismantle the original intent of the Constitution, separation of powers, and all these other things that were put in place by our founders. They don't care about them. They don't want them. So why should you bother with them? Because you're never going to implement them because they're more a series of suggestions that you're trying to avoid.
Well, here's why. Because if you don't have the rule of law and equal application of the law, you don't have civil rights. And I thought they were for civil rights. So I don't know why people like Lindsey Graham vote to confirm judges who don't know anything about the Constitution. Like, what is this?
Because from the very beginning, progressive statists have been the enemy of basic civil rights, of the rule of law, of property rights, of all these things. And over the last 100 years, it's like their colors are coming out more and more, and it's getting harder and harder to hide that. But this has been the whole point of progressivism from day one, Tucker. They have no intention of any of these basic rights. Their goal is the administrative state, and quite frankly, ultimately, it's power, authoritarianism. And so the Constitution and the law are to be disregarded. They will make of them whatever they want them to be to achieve whatever they want. The point is not the original intent of the Constitution. The goal is not the rule of law. It's whatever they can make them to be to achieve what they want, and here we are.
We're so mesmerized by watching them tear down our institutions, we don't think enough about what they're going to replace them with, and we should.
Authoritarianism.
Ned Ryan, exactly. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tucker.
Okay, let's continue. That video about what's happening in the judiciary is very, very important because I've said this a whole bunch of times, I don't think I've said it here yet, but the only reason our nation works is because at the end of the day, there's a judicial system. And if you have a problem with me or I have a problem with you, at least in theory, we can go before an honorable judge who will impartially hear the case. And I know sometimes that doesn't happen, but there are times that it does. He'll impartially hear the case, and I'll agree to submit to that. You hear my evidence, and if you disagree with me, okay, that's fine. I'm fine. I'll submit to that. But if you take that away so that everybody knows that the judiciary is a rigged game and no one can win, it's just whatever, you won't have a society for long. All of a sudden, you'll go back to might making right, period. And so having an honorable judiciary is very, very important. And what these people are doing, and we need to understand it, is these people hate America. I don't care what Rashida Tlaib says. I don't care what the Magic Muslim from Minnesota says. These people hate America. They hate everything about America, and all they want to do is tear it down. And all the things that are dear to us that made America great, revile them. They want nothing to do with any of them. They want to, and this is all just out of the Marxist playbook, tear everything down. When there's total chaos, the Marxists will step in and just take over. And that's what they're doing. And not enough people in America understand that. Again, they're more concerned with the Super Bowl scores and who's left on the island. But not you guys. You guys who are here, who are watching this, you care about this. So let's look at the Third Amendment for a little bit. And this might seem like something that doesn't really apply today, but I'm going to discuss why I think it does a little bit. Amendment number 3 says this: no soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. Okay? So, when King George tried to enforce his unlawful acts, the first thing he did is he forced the homeowners to house his soldiers so they could be used against the townspeople more readily. He knew what he was doing. And so we have this amendment. No, you can't ever house soldiers in times of peace with the citizens, period. In Europe, quartering troops was worse than a plague. Soldiers that took over the homes were notorious for raping the women, destroying the homes, abusing and pillaging the owners. One of the reasons for the Declaration of Independence was that King George had quartered large bodies of armed troops among us. Just think about that. Just think if all of a sudden 87,000 IRS agents, 170,000 IRS agents were moving from city to city, staying in your homes. That's the kind of thing that was happening with them as they dig for cases against you and try to figure out how they can come in and trap you. The evil that was produced by disarming the people in the time of King James II was that the king, by means of a police army quartered among people, was able to overawe them and compel them to submit to the most arbitrary, cruel, and illegal measures. And remember, this is Amendment number 3, and the placement of all these matters, and wait till you see what happens when we get to the Fourth Amendment. So this is what they were doing to people, and then what was the goal? Why were they doing this? But let's examine this a little further. General Smedley Butler, famous general in American history, said this: war, like any other racket, pays high dividends to the very few. The cost of operations is always transferred to the people who do not profit. Beware the leader who bangs the drums of war in order to whip the citizenry into a patriotic fervor. It emboldens the blood and narrows the mind. When the drums of war have reached a fever pitch, blood boils with hate and the mind has closed. The citizenry, infused with fear, will offer up their rights unto the leader. How do I know? That's what I have done. I am Caesar. See, there's nothing new under the sun. It's the same playbook forever. Jonathan Mayhew was one of the ministers who fired up the revolution. He was such a strong leader, such a strong Christian. Listen to what he said. Tyranny brings ignorance and brutality. It degrades men into the class of brutes. It dampens their spirits. It makes naturally strong and great minds feeble and little, and triumphs over the ruins of virtue. Every friend to truth and every lover of God and the Christian religion ought to bear a part in opposing the hateful monster of tyranny. That's a warning to all of us from the people who founded this great nation. We are watching tyranny explode in this country right now. What is tyranny? I gave you the definition last week. Anytime you take a power you do not have and push it onto people, you are a tyrant. That is the definition of tyranny, period. So do we have troops quartered with us today? Well, not really. But we weren't supposed to have a standing army either. And we certainly spend a tremendous amount of money on all of that. So do we need an army? Well, the world's kind of a crazy place. Maybe we do. I'm not really sure. I suppose we probably do. But do we need the police force that's being turned against us the way it is? These spy agencies seem to think that they are completely above law and accountability. Where do we draw the lines? I don't know. But I do know that the Third Amendment makes a big difference. Because what was the king doing when he had the people quartered in homes? Let's look at the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says this, it's so important. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Okay? So a warrant has to issue before things can happen. And frequently, when police come knocking at a door and they're going to exercise a warrant, they don't have the warrant with them. Do you have to go with them? Do you have to do what they say? Yes, no. Anybody? We have a warrant. Psh, show it to me. Well, it's down the station. You'll see it when you get there. Get out of here, buddy. You have no authority to be here. You're here illegally. I have no obligation to follow you when you present yourself illegally. Zero obligation. Supreme Court's made that clear. Get lost. Very important. So he comes back with a warrant. Do you have to go with him? I'm sorry, where's the oath or affirmation here? I need to see that too. Very important. It's required. Very, very important. Freedom means the right to keep private our personal papers, our books, our property, including financial records, including our electronic records today. Same thing. Not to be surrendered at the whim of a government bureaucrat. They cannot just come in and take them. In the old days, what they used to do is they would go into homes, they would rifle through your desks and through your personal effects until they found something that they could say, hey, this is evidence that something must be going on. You must be guilty of something or whatever we think it is, and we're going to charge you. And that's what they did. And it was very convenient having troops in the homes to be able to do such things. That's why the troops were first ordered out, Amendment number 3, Amendment number 4, and by the way, you don't have any right to go through anything in our homes without a warrant, period. Now, what is the oath or affirmation that has to be given in order to get the warrant? Well, I have to go to the police station, and I have to say that Johnny came over my house and shot at me, and he was carrying a .38 Special snub-nose revolver that was silver, and he fired 5 shots at us. And here's the complaint. I'm swearing to it. This is actually what happened. There's a real person, me, saying that a real injury occurred. He fired shots through my windows, almost killed the family, and go get him. And so now they show up armed with the warrant, backed up by the oath or affirmation for me, And Johnny, get back. We're coming into your house. You're likely to be under arrest right here, right now. Period. That's all legal. That's the way it's supposed to work. They don't have that warrant. Get out of here. I got called in years ago. I had a very interesting visit from the FBI. Didn't expect a visit from the FBI. And he had a warrant type thing for me. I'm like, what's this? And it had to do with someone I had known, and we want a testimony from you, and we want handwriting samples and whatever. I'm like, yeah, I really appreciate that, but yep, it expired a week ago. Sorry, can't help you. Seriously. You have to pay attention to what the law is. You have to know the law. You have to be willing. I said to you before, any right you are not willing to defend, you do not have. And if you don't know about them, then you might as well not have them. I'm an American. I'm a citizen. I've got rights. Really, what are they? I don't know. You can't do this, can you? Yeah, we can. Oh, okay. No, they can't, but you don't know how to stop it. You have to know these things. You have to be aware of what these things are. This Amendment 4 is based on the old common law maxim that every man's house is his castle. Even though the winds of heaven may blow through it, the king, or government official, cannot enter it. We are not to be seized or arrested without a search warrant signed by a judge, not a bureaucrat, but a judge, establishing a probable cause that a crime has been committed. This right was claimed by our forefathers against the writs of assistance or general warrants that England used to have that allowed officers to go on fishing expeditions in searching a man's premises to entrap him, which is what I just told you. Listen to the Supreme Court case. The powers of government under our system are nowhere absolute. They are but grants of authority from the people. The fundamental rights of the people are inherent and have not been yielded to government control. Constitutional powers can never transcend into constitutional rights. The police power is subject to the limitations imposed by the Constitution. That's the Supreme Court in Spann versus City of Dallas. Supreme Court. Yeah, lost. You don't have that authority. You can't do it. You all know who Edmund Burke was, correct? Edmund Burke said the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Listen to what he said here. He's a very smart guy. The power of perpetuating our property in our families is one of the most valuable and interesting circumstances belonging to it. What does perpetuating our property into our families mean? We can pass it on from generation to generation. And that which tends the most to the perpetuation of society itself. So in other words, that I can pass on my fortune to my children, and hopefully they'll do well with it and build it and pass it to their children. Not only is that good for me and for my children, but it is one of the most important things to build society. It makes our weaknesses subservient to our virtue. It grants benevolence even upon avarice. It changes things. It makes things good. And that's why there's such a great move to take away inheritances and to tax them to death. And if you don't know anything about estates and estate taxes and how difficult all that stuff is today, there's a reason for it. Because if families can do that, they can become extremely prosperous. Ezra Pound said this: the technique of infamy is to invent two lies and to get people arguing heatedly over which of them is true. That's what's going on today, trying as hard as they can to divide our nation. 1 billion men have since professed Christ's way and never followed it. We have the opportunity to understand what it is to be Americans and follow it. The reason I mentioned that about inheritance is because in the process of what's happened in our nation, there are all kinds of laws that have been developed to strip us of our property, piece by piece. And they're really getting even more intense today with things that they're trying to do. For example, the programmable digital currency. That people have to stand up and resist that. So many people will just go along with it. First of all, what they'll do is they'll say, well, if you switch your account to this now, it'll be voluntary. If you switch your account today, we'll give you $100 free. And people go, oh, wow, I can cash all my cash in, I get $100. Oh, it's so wonderful. It's just right here, tip, tip, ding, 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 ding. Oh, look, it works, it's fine, it's beautiful. What's anybody's problem with this? It's wonderful. That's what will happen. That's how they'll do it. They'll entice people into it. And people who don't know anything about it will just follow it hook, line, and sinker. But the truth is that we have a right to be secure in our homes, and we have a right to be secure in our possessions. And one of our possessions is our things that we would leave to our posterity. And I'm not going to get into that whole subject. We'll leave it for now. But I will go to Groucho Marx because he had some tremendous wisdom. He said this: politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it everywhere, diagnosing it incorrectly, and applying the wrong remedies. I want to close with one little story that's very true. It goes back about 10 years to 2013. Barack Obama was president. And I missed something, and I caught the second round. And the second round was that Barack Obama had appointed 10 governors in the United States. And I saw that story, it immediately caught my eye. I'm like, 10 governors? Whoa, we have 50 governors. What do we need 10 more governors for? What's this? So I began to dig into the story, and it really terrified me. And it's still law, and you'll understand it in a minute. And these 10 governors were FEMA people who would help out. Of course, it's all about helping. This is all just for your own good. It's just to help you. Who would help out if there's ever a big emergency in the country. And they'll just help to get federal things where they need to go and just help. And I knew immediately that was a bunch of baloney, but it didn't terrify me until I went back 6 months and found that FEMA had divided the country into 10 regions. And that each region had a good supply of concentration camps. They call them FEMA camps, but they're concentration camps. And 10 governors had been appointed, one over each of those regions. Now, that's troubling. And that's still law. And quite frankly, Barack Obama is still calling the shots behind the scenes. I think that he and Susan Rice are probably the biggest forces behind the thief-in-chief who's sitting in the White House these days, Mr. Biden, because clearly he's not calling too much at all. So this is something to be very careful of. It exists. And the attempt right now is to divide the nation as much as possible in as many ways as possible. Why are they doing that? United we're strong. United we are a force that they cannot stop. But if all the black people hate the white people, and the white people hate the Puerto Rican people, and the Puerto Rican people and the white people and the black people hate the Asians, and all of them together hate the Jewish people, then we can keep everybody pretty busy for a while. And we can do whatever we want. And if it starts to look like it's going to get away from it a little bit, then we'll just make sure that Russia lobs a couple of nuclear weapons, because once that happens, everybody's going to be terrified. They're going to want us to protect them, whatever the cost. And that's what's playing out right in front of our eyes. Look at the news reports this week. That's what's playing out. So the best we can do is to keep informing people. There was an incident 10-ish years ago. We had our show, and at that point it was extremely popular. We had about 500,000 daily listeners. And I received a report that I can tell you when it was. Barack Obama had just left with 2/3 of Congress and gone to the Orient. I don't know if you remember that. It may not stick out. You remember that? You do? Okay. And it was a big deal. What are you taking all these people? What are you taking 2/3 of Congress out of the country for? What the heck? What's that all about? Oh, well, it's a fact-finding mission. It's this, it's that, whatever his baloney story was. I'll come back to the last stop. This is a true story. You can verify all this. While he was over there, we got a report that a military plane had been loaded with nuclear weapons and was flying over the country and was going to nuke at least one or two cities. So there's an old saying in politics, making a thing public makes it intolerable. And so a whole bunch of us kind of communicated with each other, and collectively we had really millions of listeners. And we all got on the air, and we started talking about this plane that's over the U.S. right now. It was loaded at such and such a place, blah, blah, blah. It's got nukes on it. 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 Well, that furor forced that plane down. It went down in Louisiana. Didn't crash. It landed in Louisiana. And it had nukes. Now, let's take a couple elements of the story here, because it's all very important. And so the first thing that happened was they said, oh, they were accidentally loaded on a plane. Now I know nukes aren't accidentally loaded on a plane, okay? They say, oh, it was accidentally done. Well, one of one of my guests, frequent co-host on the show, is Randy Kelton out of Texas. And Randy's got a huge following. And Randy was a former military guy, and his job was nuclear weapons in the Air Force, or whatever branch he was in. It was nuclear weapons. And he told an interesting story about, he said, I had him on that day, and he said, there are no accidental anythings with nukes. There are so many redundancies and protections and chains of command and everything. It's not possible that there was an accidentally with a nuke. Simply not possible. And then he told the story. He said, I was a young military guy, in his 20s, and when nuclear weapons were being rolled out to be put underneath the wings of planes, he said an area was encircled, and in that area, nobody steps in that area. Nobody steps in that area except the technicians working on the nuclear weapons. Nobody steps in that area. I don't care what the rank is, no one steps in. And a colonel, or whatever the guy's rank was, much higher than Randy's, stepped toward it, and he said, sir, please step back. Presented his gun. Sir, please step back. And the guy came forward further, and he clocked his gun and pointed it at him. Didn't say a word, just clicked it and pointed at him. The guy said, okay, soldier, good job, just checking you. And I don't know if he was just checking or if he was doing something, whatever. But the point is, there are no accidentalities with a nuclear weapon, period. So what was the intention that day? Honestly, what do I really believe? I believe the intention was to nuke Washington, D.C. I believe the 2/3 of Congress that were out of the country were the ones that were friendly to Barack Obama. Now, I can prove that. Here's how I can prove it. You say, well, Pastor, that's a crazy, wild conspiracy theory. No, it's not a conspiracy theory. Put 2 and 2 together and do the math and smell the Java. Okay? 2/3 of Congress never been taken out of the country before at the same time. Why? What's that all about? Everybody wondered, what's that all about? It was an enormous cost. I forget what the cost was. A huge cost, just a huge cost to take all of them. Enormous cost. And why would they do that? Well, how do you think you can prove it? 2 ways. One, there's no such thing as an accidentally with a nuclear weapon. Doesn't happen. So the fact that they went to that tells me you're absolutely lying, that you had a plan. Second thing, what was Barack Obama's last stop on that trip? Hiroshima. And what would his speech have been? And just as Hiroshima rose out of the ashes and recovered, the United States will too. I'm on my way back. We're going to build back this nation. That's what I believe was going on. Honestly, I do. That's what I think was happening. Anyway, can we prove it? Yeah, do the math a little bit. Do the math a little bit. That's how I think you prove it. Thank you very much.